The desert sun burned high over the horizon, painting the land in tones of gold and rust. Wind moved through the dry grass, carrying the cry of a hawk and the faint hum of distant horses. In that wide, lonely stretch of New Mexico territory, a young woman walked barefoot through the dust, her torn dress dragging behind her. Her lips were cracked, her hands raw. Yet her eyes, pale and fierce still, carried a spark that refused to die. She didn't look back anymore. There was nothing left behind her worth turning for. The house she had once called home stood miles away, but it had never been a place of peace. Her father's anger had filled every wall, every breath, every moment. He was a man who carried shame like a weapon and poured it over others when his pride could not bear its own weight. And she, his only daughter, had taken the worst of it. For years, she had learned to stay silent, to obey, to smile even when her heart begged her to run. The small town nearby knew her father as a hard but respectable man, a landowner who built his fortune from sweat and cattle. They saw his sternness as strength, his cruelty as discipline. Nobody asked why she flinched when he entered her room or why she never danced at the county gatherings anymore. But the truth had a way of pressing through even the thickest soil. Rumors had started spreading through the dusty streets, whispered by ranch hands and store clerks, about what went on inside that White House at the edge of the valley. And when pride and gossip finally collided, her father's fury became something unholy. The night she fled, she could still hear his voice behind her, shouting words that burned worse than any wound. By morning, she was far from town. The desert stretched before her like an ocean of sand, and she didn't know where the next drink of water would come from. She only knew she couldn't go back. Her legs trembled, her body bruised, but something deep inside urged her to keep walking. Every breath tasted like dust and freedom. The sun sank lower, the air turning cool. Coyotes howled in the distance, and her steps began to slow. She stumbled once, then twice, and fell to her knees beside a patch of sagebrush. Her heartbeat was heavy in her ears, her vision dimming. She pressed her hand to the ground and whispered a prayer, though she wasn't sure who she was praying to anymore. Maybe to the land itself, or to the spirits the locals spoke of in quiet tones. That was when she heard it. A sound not born of the wind or the night, a faint rhythm, the steady drumming of hooves. Her heart leaped, and fear gripped her at once. She tried to rise, but her body refused. A dark figure appeared over the ridge, outlined against the fading light. A horse, tall and sure-footed, carrying a rider dressed in buckskin and feathers. He moved with quiet control, his eyes sharp, his presence commanding yet calm. He reined in his horse beside her and looked down without a word. She could barely lift her gaze, yet something about him, his stillness, his strength stirred a strange comfort inside her. The mark on his chest told her he was Apache, one of the warriors who lived beyond the white man's reach. In the mountains and canyons that others feared to cross, the stories told in town had painted his people as savage. But there was nothing savage in the way he watched her. His silence was heavy, but not cruel. He saw her bruised face, her torn dress, and the blood on her hands that wasn't from any fight she had chosen. He dismounted slowly, offering her a flask of water. She hesitated for a moment, then took it, her fingers trembling as she drank. The water stung her dry throat, but it was the first real kindness she had felt in a long time. "Why are you alone out here?" he asked finally, his voice low, like a calm current beneath the storm. She couldn't answer right away. The words felt tangled inside her, too heavy to speak, but he didn't press. Instead, he watched the horizon as if listening to the land itself. The air shifted. She could hear the distant cry of an owl and the rustle of a snake sliding through the brush. When she finally found her voice, it came out soft and broken. "I had to leave. He would have killed me." Apache nodded, as if he already understood. In the wild, a wounded soul was not a mystery. It was something seen and respected. He offered her his hand, helping her to her feet. She winced but stood. For the first time in days, she didn't feel completely alone. He led his horse slowly beside her, guiding her toward the shadow of the mountains. The desert night grew colder, stars spilling across the dark sky like scattered silver. They walked in silence, the only sound, the soft tread of hooves and the whisper of wind as they neared the foothills. She caught sight of smoke curling up from a small camp hidden among the rocks. The faint smell of roasted corn and cedar wood reached her nose. She hadn't realized until then how hungry she was. The Apache spoke in his own tongue to someone near the fire, and another figure emerged, an older woman, wrapped in a woven blanket. Her eyes softened when she saw the stranger beside her son. The woman led her to the fire, giving her food and a place to rest. Every movement carried warmth and quiet dignity. Nobody asked her questions. Nobody looked at her with judgment. The crackling firelight made her feel safer than she had ever felt within the walls of her father's house. But even as her body relaxed, her heart could not. The world she had left behind would not let go so easily. Her father was a man of pride and power. He would send riders to find her, to drag her back under his roof. She knew it was only a matter of time. That night, lying beneath a sky so full of stars it almost hurt to look at, she stared into the flames and wondered if peace ever truly existed, or if she was only borrowing it for a little while, across the fire. The Apache watched her quietly. He saw more than her bruises. He saw the fight that still burned behind her eyes. In his world, pain was not an end, but a beginning. The mountains had their own way of healing those who came with broken hearts. When morning came, he told her there was a river nearby where the water ran clear from the mountain's heart. "If you wish," he said, "you can stay here until you find your strength again." She wanted to thank him, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she nodded, and he understood. For the next few days, she began to breathe differently. The fear didn't vanish overnight, but the quiet rhythm of the land started to fill her again. She learned to gather herbs from the older woman, to ride with the wind at her back, to listen when the night carried distant echoes. Yet something inside her still trembled. Every shadow made her wonder if someone was following. Every gust of wind sounded like her father's voice calling out from the past. She had escaped but not yet been freed. Then one evening, as the sun melted behind the cliffs, a lone rider appeared in the valley below. His horse was familiar, his stance unmistakable. Even from the distance, she could feel the anger radiating from him. Her breath caught. The Apache warrior beside her tense. Her father had found her. The air seemed to freeze between the two worlds, hers and the one she was learning to trust. The mountains stood silent, the sky darkening as the storm of fate began to gather again. And in that moment, she knew her freedom would have to be earned, not just taken. The past had found her, but so had something far stronger waiting to fight beside her. The wind rose from the canyon, carrying a thin layer of dust that caught the dying light. The young woman stood still at the edge of the ridge, her heart pounding as the shape of her father grew clearer below. His horse was dark and restless, hooves breaking the silence of the valley. Even from that distance, she could feel the same authority she had spent her life running from. His shoulders were stiff, his jaw set tight. He had always been a man who believed he owned whatever he could hold in his hands. And now he had come to claim what he believed was his again. The Apache beside her didn't move. His eyes followed the rider below, calm yet alert, reading the land, and the man with the patience of someone who had seen storms come and go. His hand rested lightly near the hilt of his knife, not in threat, but in readiness. He understood danger not from fear, but from instinct. The woman felt his quiet strength like a wall beside her, and it gave her enough courage to breathe again. The older woman came out of the small shelter near the fire, her face marked with concern. "He followed your trail," she said softly, in a mix of English and her native tongue. "He will not stop easily." The younger woman nodded. She knew her father's nature too well. When anger blinded him, there was no reasoning, no turning back. He would not listen to her words or care for her pain. To him, her leaving was a stain on his pride, and pride was something he guarded more fiercely than life itself. That night, the small Apache camp stayed quiet, the fire burning low. The young woman sat near the flames, staring into the embers as they cracked and faded. Every sound from the dark made her tense. Her rescuer sat across from her, sharpening his blade in silence. though his eyes often lifted to the shadows beyond the firelight. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. "He'll come here. He won't stop until he finds me." The Apache met her eyes. "Then we will be ready," he said. His words were simple, but they carried weight. They reminded her that strength did not always come from anger or shouting. It could live in stillness too. As the night deepened, she found herself telling him what had driven her to flee. Her words came slowly, uncertain at first, but once they began, they didn't stop. She spoke of how her father's house had grown colder after her mother's death, how the man who once smiled only at her had turned hard and bitter. He blamed the world for his losses and took it out on whatever he could control. She remembered the day he had struck her for the first time. My humiliation. She had been 12, too young to understand pride, too old to forget the shame. From that day on, she lived like a shadow under his roof, careful not to breathe too loudly, careful not to show her heart. But as the years passed, silence became heavier than fear. And when his temper finally turned toward destruction, she ran before he could destroy her too. The Apache listened without interrupting. His face stayed calm, but his eyes told her that he understood more than words could say. When she finished, there was no pity in his gaze-only understanding. "A man who forgets mercy," he said slowly, "forgets what it means to lead." For the first time, she felt like someone had seen the truth she had carried alone. The fire flickered, casting their shadows long against the canyon wall. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called, and the sound echoed through the night like a warning. At dawn, she awoke to find the Apache already gone from camp. The older woman was stirring a pot near the fire. "He went to track your father," she explained, "to see how close he is." The young woman's stomach tightened. The thought of him riding into danger for her made her uneasy, though she knew he didn't act out of recklessness. The Apache people lived by a code that bound them to protect those who had no one else. Still, worry gnawed at her. Hours passed before he returned. His horse was covered in dust, and his expression told her all she needed to know. "He's near," he said. "2 men ride with him. They carry rifles." Her father had brought others. That meant he wasn't just coming to take her home, he was coming to make a point. Maybe he wanted to scare her. Maybe worse. She felt her throat tighten. But the Apache's steady presence kept her from falling apart. "We can leave," she said quickly. "Go farther into the mountains." He shook his head. "He will follow your tracks again. He will not stop until you face him." His words settled in the air, sharp but true. She didn't want to face her father, yet deep inside, she knew she couldn't keep running forever. The thought of standing before him again filled her with dread. But also something new, a quiet strength she hadn't felt before. That evening, the Apache led her to a higher ridge where the valley opened wide below. The setting sun painted everything in red and copper. From there, she could see her father's campfire burning far off in the distance. The smoke rose straight into the sky, unmoving. "He camps close enough to find you by morning," the Apache said. Her breath caught. "What will he do when he finds us?" He looked at her, his eyes calm but sure. "That depends on what you do." She stared at the horizon, the firelight flickering below like a memory she could not escape. For so long, she had believed her father's anger defined her. But standing there, feeling the solid ground beneath her feet and the strength of the mountain behind her, something shifted. She realized that running had saved her body. But facing him might be the only way to save her spirit. As night fell again, the Apache prepared quietly. He tied his horse, checked his bow, and spoke little. The older woman sang softly by the fire, her voice blending with the wind. The young woman sat beside her, listening to the melody that sounded older than time itself. It calmed her trembling heart in the darkness. She thought of her mother, the gentle hands that once brushed her hair, the soft hum of lullabies that had long since faded from memory. Her mother had always believed there was good in everyone, even in her father. But the man who had raised his hand in anger was not the same man who once brought flowers home after the first rain. Somewhere along the years, pain had hardened him. She didn't hate him. She pitied him. Yet she couldn't let his hatred control her anymore. When the first light of dawn touched the canyon walls, The Apache warrior was already awake, scanning the valley below. He could see faint movement, 3 riders heading toward them. The young woman's pulse quickened. It was time. "Stay behind the rocks," he told her. "Do not move unless I say." She wanted to argue, to tell him she needed to face this herself, but her fear silenced her. He moved down the slope quietly, blending into the brush like a shadow. She watched from above, her breath shallow. The riders grew closer, their voices faint but sharp. Her father's tone was unmistakable, commanding, bitter, and filled with pride. When they reached the clearing, the Apache stepped out, calm and tall. The men stopped short, startled by his sudden presence. Her father narrowed his eyes, his hand drifting toward his holster. "Where is she?" he demanded. "She is safe," the Apache said simply. "That's my daughter you're hiding," her father snapped. "And you'll hand her over before this gets ugly?" The warrior didn't move. His gaze was steady, unreadable. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the wind and the creak of leather saddles. From her hiding place above, the young woman's heart raced. She could see her father's fury building, the same cold fire she had lived under for years. Yet this time she wasn't alone. The Apache didn't flinch, didn't meet anger with anger. He stood like the mountain itself, unshaken. Her father's men shifted uneasily, sensing something they couldn't quite name. The Apache's calm was unnerving. The land seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a sudden jerk of the reins, her father dismounted. "If she's here," he said, his voice low, "I'll find her myself." The Apache moved slightly, his voice carrying across the wind. "She will come when she chooses. No man can take what the spirit of the land has set free." Her father's face twisted with rage. "You talk like a priest, but she's mine." From above, the young woman felt her strength return. The sound of those words, those same words he had used all her life, cut deep but no longer controlled her. She rose from behind the rocks, her knees trembling, but her will firm. The Apache turned his head slightly, meeting her eyes for a moment. He didn't speak, but that single look told her everything. This was her moment. She stepped into the open light, her voice steady despite her fear. "I'm not yours anymore." The mountains echoed her words, carrying them into the distance. His face changed, shock, disbelief, and something darker flickered there. But before he could speak again, thunder rolled in the distance, and the sky above the desert began to shift. The storm was coming, and with it, the battle between past and freedom had only just begun. The wind carried a low growl from the horizon, warning that the storm was near. Clouds rolled over the mountains, swallowing the sunlight until the land turned a dim copper gray. The young woman stood in the open clearing, the Apache warrior at her side, and her father facing her with the same cold eyes she had grown up fearing. The years between them felt heavy, filled with every unspoken word and every wound that had never healed. For a moment, neither moved. The air hung still, heavy with tension. Her father's men shifted uneasily on their horses, glancing between the warrior and the woman. They were used to seeing him in command, but something about this place, about the stillness of the Apache's presence, made them hesitate. The land itself seemed to favor silence over violence. "You don't belong here," her father said finally, his voice sharp. "You belong with your family. You belong at home." She shook her head, her voice soft but steady. "That house stopped being home a long time ago." The words seemed to strike him harder than any weapon could. He took a step closer, his boots grinding into the dust. "You think you can live with savages? You think they'll treat you better than your own blood?" The Apache didn't react, though his gaze never left the older man. "Blood means nothing when it breaks the spirit," he said quietly. Her father turned toward him, fury flashing in his eyes. "Stay out of this. This is between me and my daughter." But it wasn't just between them anymore. It was between two worlds, one ruled by pride and control, and another by freedom and respect. The woman felt the weight of both pressing on her, threatening to crush the fragile peace she had found. "I'm not leaving with you," she said again, louder this time. "You can't control me anymore." Her father's hand twitched toward his belt, not for a weapon, but from the habit of power. "You think this man cares for you?" He'll use you until you're no good to him, then leave you in the dirt." She looked at the Apache, whose calm didn't waver. "He already saved me," she said softly. "Something you never did." The air between them grew sharper, like a blade drawn from its sheath. Her father stared at her, his pride wounded beyond repair. But behind that pride was something else, a flicker of pain buried so deep it had turned to bitterness. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came. Before the silence could break, thunder rolled across the sky. Lightning flashed behind the mountains, and the horses began to stir. The Apache stepped forward slightly, his body angled protectively between her and the approaching storm. "We should move to shelter," he said. Her father ignored the warning. "You'll come with me," he ordered. Now, when she didn't move, he took another step forward, his anger rising again. The Apache's hand lifted slightly, a silent command for him to stop. That simple gesture made the air tense like a bowstring. The older man glared. "You threaten me in front of my own daughter?" "I protect her," the Apache replied, "even from the man who should have done it first." The storm broke open above them, rain beginning to fall in uneven drops. Her father's men backed their horses toward the trees, wanting no part in what was unfolding. She could feel the fear in her chest, but also a strange calm. For the first time, she wasn't the one cowering. The confrontation broke apart when a flash of lightning struck a tree nearby, sending sparks through the air. The horses reared, and chaos followed. Her father stumbled back, his hat blown off by the wind. The Apache grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the rocks. They ran through the rain, their clothes soaked, the sound of thunder echoing through the canyon. Behind them, her father shouted her name, but the wind carried his voice away. She didn't look back. By the time they reached the shelter near the cliffs, both were drenched. The older woman was waiting, her eyes full of worry. "He will come again," she said, handing the young woman a blanket. "Men like that don't stop after the first storm." The Apache nodded. "He won't give up until he's certain he's lost her." The young woman wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, her body trembling. "He doesn't see me," she said quietly. "To him, I'm just something to own." The older woman placed a hand on her shoulder. "He sees what he fears losing," she said. "But fear can twist love into something unrecognizable." That night, the rain continued, drumming softly on the rocks. The Apache sat by the fire, carving a small piece of wood. His movements were slow and deliberate, his face thoughtful. She watched him for a while, wondering what he saw in her story. If he understood how hard it was to be both grateful and afraid. He finally spoke. "In my tribe, when a hawk is caught in a snare, it struggles until its wings bleed. But once it's free, it learns to fly higher than before. You are that hawk." She smiled faintly, the words sinking deep. "I don't feel free yet." "Freedom begins inside," he said simply. But she knew the truth. Freedom wasn't something easily earned. Her father's shadow would follow her for a long time. Even now, she could hear his voice in her mind, full of command and disappointment. The more she tried to forget, the louder it seemed to echo. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the earth damp and shining. Mist hung low over the valley. The Apache led her along a narrow path that wound between the cliffs. He showed her where the river flowed clear, where wild herbs grew for healing. Each step away from the past felt lighter. But the peace didn't last. Near the bend in the path, they found a trail hoof prints fresh in the mud. 3 horses had passed through recently. Her heart tightened. "He's still following us," she whispered. The Apache studied the tracks. "Yes," he said, "but not alone." She looked up at him. "What do you mean?" He pointed to a second set of prints, smaller, lighter. "A boy rides with them. One of the ranch hands." That name pulled her back to memories of the town, a quiet stable boy who had always been kind to her. He had once warned her to be careful when her father's temper grew wild. Maybe he had joined the search out of loyalty, or maybe out of fear. She didn't know. The Apache's expression darkened. "Your father may not be looking to bring you home anymore. Men who ride this far with rifles come for something else." "What could he want now?" she asked. "Control," he said. "Or revenge." They returned to camp before nightfall. The older woman was weaving by the fire, humming softly. The sound was steady, but the tension in the air could not be ignored. The young woman felt trapped between two worlds, her old life pulling her back with guilt and fear, and this new life demanding courage she wasn't sure she had yet. As darkness fell, the Apache took a torch and climbed to a high ridge to watch for riders. From there, he could see the faint glow of campfires in the distance, too many to belong to travelers. The ranch hands had set up camp closer than ever. He returned quietly, his voice low. "They are waiting for daylight." "They know where we are." The young woman's heart sank. "Then what do we do?" "Prepare," he said, "and trust the land. It will fight with us if we respect it." That night, sleep didn't come easily. She lay near the fire, her mind full of images from the past, the ranch house, her father's voice, her mother's laughter. It was strange how memories could hurt more than wounds. Before dawn, she woke to faint movement outside the camp. The Apache was gone. She sat up, her pulse quickening. Then she heard a whisper of footsteps, a low murmur. She grabbed a stick from the fire and stepped into the shadows. Two figures stood at the edge of the camp. The rain from the night before had left their clothes soaked and muddy. One was the ranch hand she recognized, the boy with nervous eyes. The other was her father's man, tall figure with a rifle slung across his back. When they saw her, the boy raised his hands quickly. "I didn't come to hurt you," he said. "He doesn't know I'm here." The tall man glared at him but stayed silent. She lowered the stick slightly. "Why are you here?" The boy looked around. "Your father's changed. He's not just looking for you anymore. He's blaming the Apache for taking you. He says he'll burn their camp if he has to." The older woman had stepped out quietly behind her, listening. The words hit like thunder. Before she could answer, the Apache appeared from the shadows, his eyes sharp. He had heard everything. "Then he has declared war," he said calmly. The boy looked between them, guilt flooding his face. "You have to stop him before he reaches the valley." The woman felt the ground shift beneath her. Everything she had feared was now real. Her father wasn't just coming for her, he was coming for blood. And as the first rays of sunlight touched the mountains, she knew the choice ahead would test everything she had become. The past was no longer behind her. It was riding toward her, fast and unforgiving. The sun rose red that morning, spreading light through a sky that felt too quiet. Even the birds stayed hidden in the canyon trees. The air carried a strange heaviness, the kind that warned of something close, something inevitable. The young woman stood near the river, her hands trembling as she filled a small pouch with water. Behind her, the Apache warrior was silent, watching the valley where thin trails of smoke were beginning to rise in the distance. "They're moving," he said softly. "Your father and his men. They've started toward the foothills." Her heart dropped. The valley that had given her peace for the first time in years was now about to become a battlefield. She wanted to believe her father would come to talk, but deep down, she knew better. Pride had always been stronger than reason in him. The older woman approached them, carrying a small woven basket filled with herbs and charms. Her face was calm, but her eyes showed worry. "The land will test your hearts today," she said, handing the basket to the young woman. "Take courage from it. Fear cannot live where purpose is strong." The Apache nodded in silent respect. He understood her words. The young woman held the basket close, feeling the warmth of it, as if it carried the strength of everyone who had ever survived on this land. As the morning stretched on, the Apache and his few tribesmen prepared quietly. They moved with steady purpose, checking weapons, leading the horses to safe ground, marking paths through the rocks. The young woman watched them work, every motion balanced between patience and urgency. These men had lived their whole lives ready for hardship, but this battle wasn't theirs. It was coming because of her. That thought weighed heavy in her chest. At midday, they gathered on the ridge overlooking the open plain. From there, she could see the faint figures moving through the brush riders, at least a dozen, her father among them. His white hat caught the sunlight, bright and unyielding. He rode in front, just as he always had in life, leading through power rather than wisdom. "They'll reach the valley by nightfall," the Apache said. We have time to move the women and the horses deeper into the canyon." The young woman turned toward him. "What about you?" He met her eyes, his voice steady. "I will speak to him. Words first. Always words before war." She wanted to believe words would be enough, but her father had never been a man who listened when his pride was wounded. She remembered how he would stand in the doorway, his voice sharp, drowning out every plea. Still, something in the Apache's calm gave her a small flicker of hope. The older woman and the others began to pack what they could. The young woman helped them, though her hands shook. The scent of sage and smoke filled the air. Every sound, the crackle of fire, the scrape of wood, the distant cry of a hawk felt sharper than usual, as if the world was holding its breath. When the sun began to fall, painting the canyon walls in deep orange, the Apache returned from his watch. His horse was covered in dust, and his face was marked by wind and thought. "They're closer than I expected," he said. "They've set camp near the river. They'll come at dawn." The young woman felt her stomach twist. "Then this is my fault," she whispered. "They're here because of me." He stepped closer, his voice quiet but firm. "No, they came because of their own fear. You cannot blame yourself for the truth that frightens them." "But he's my father," she said, her voice breaking. "He raised me. He taught me to be strong, but not like this. If I face him again, I don't know what I'll say." "Then say what you must," the Apache said. "Even if he cannot hear it, say it for yourself." Night fell slow and heavy. The campfire burned low, sending tiny sparks into the darkness. The young woman couldn't sleep. She sat by the fire, listening to the wind moving through the canyon, carrying distant sounds that could have been thunder or hooves. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her father's face, cold and proud. And the fear she had tried to bury rose again. The Apache sat across from her, silent. His knife glinted faintly in the firelight as he sharpened it, though his mind was far away. He was not thinking of war, but of what came after, of the cost that pride always demanded. He had seen too many men destroy everything they loved in the name of power. When the first pale light touched the sky, the sound they had been waiting for finally came. Hooves, many of them. The earth trembled beneath their rhythm. The young woman stood, her breath shallow. She could see dust rising at the mouth of the canyon, where the trail narrowed between the rocks. Her father's men were coming. The Apache motioned for his warriors to take position. They moved like shadows among the stones, unseen but ready. The plan was simple: block the trail, speak first. Fight only if there was no other choice. Her father rode in front, just as before. His face was drawn tight with determination, his eyes scanning the canyon walls. He didn't see her yet, hidden behind the rocks near the riverbank. His men followed close behind, their rifles across their saddles, their expressions uncertain. They were used to following orders, but this was no ordinary chase. When they reached the narrow bend, the Apache stepped out. His presence stopped them cold. The horses reared slightly, and the men gripped their reins. The Apache raised one hand in peace, his voice clear across the canyon. "You ride into land that does not belong to you," he said. "Turn back. No one here seeks your harm." Her father's voice came sharp in reply. "You took my daughter. You think I'll ride home and pretend it didn't happen?" The Apache's tone didn't change. "She came here on her own. No man owns another's spirit. Her father barked out a bitter laugh. "You talk like you know her. She's been lost since her mother died. She doesn't know what she wants." From her hiding place, the young woman felt her heart twist. Every word of his struck like a whip, so familiar, so final. She had spent her life being told who she was, what she felt, what she deserved. But this time, she wasn't the same frightened girl who had stood silent in his shadow. The Apache spoke again, his voice deep and steady. "You mistake control for care. She is not lost. She has found herself." Her father's jaw tightened. "Then let her say it," he said. "If she wants to stay here, let her tell me to my face." The Apache hesitated. He turned slightly, looking toward her. His eyes met hers for a brief moment. A silent question, asking if she was ready. She stepped forward, her feet heavy, but certain. The men shifted in surprise as she appeared from behind the rocks. Her hair was tangled, her clothes dusty, but her gaze was clear. She walked past the Apache until she stood before her father. He stared at her like he was seeing a ghost. For a long moment, neither spoke. The sound of the river filled the silence. "You don't belong here," he said finally, his voice softer than before. "You belong with your people." "I am with my people," she said. Her father's eyes narrowed. "You think you're one of them?" "No," she said. "I'm not. But they gave me what you never did. They gave me peace." Anger flashed in his eyes, mixed with something like grief. "Peace," he said. "You call running away peace? You brought shame to me, to your mother's name." Her throat tightened. "You already shamed it when you turned your heart to hate." The words hung in the air like a blade. Her father's hand twitched toward his belt again, and the Apache took a step forward, ready if he needed to be. The men behind her father shifted nervously, unsure if they were soldiers or witnesses now. The older man looked around, realizing for the first time how outnumbered he was, not by weapons, but by truth. Still, pride held him upright. "If you stay here," he said, "you'll never be welcome again in my home." She met his eyes, steady as the river behind her. "Then I'll build my own." Lightning flashed above them, a white streak across the darkening sky. The storm was returning just as it had the day she fled. The horses stamped, restless. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. The Apache raised his voice again, calm but strong. "Take your men and go. There is no victory for you here." But her father didn't move. His pride refused to bend. "You think you can steal my daughter and order me off this land?" He drew his revolver in one sharp motion, pointing it straight at the Apache. Gasps broke from the men behind him, but none dared intervene. The young woman froze. Every memory of fear came rushing back, every time she had stood helpless before him. But this time was different. This time, she would not bow. She stepped between them, her voice trembling but clear. "If you want to destroy something, start with your own pride." For a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop. Her father's eyes flickered. Disbelief and something else she couldn't name. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder, soaking the earth beneath their feet. The Apache didn't move. His gaze stayed locked on her father, ready for whatever came next. The storm roared louder, thunder echoing through the valley, and in that instant, when time felt stretched thin as wire, everything hung on a single breath, the trigger half pulled, the river raging below, and the sky breaking open above them, the past and present collided. And the moment that would decide all their fates had finally arrived. The rain came down in heavy sheets, washing over the valley and blurring the line between sky and earth. For a few moments, everything seemed frozen in that tense space between action and regret. The young woman stood in the middle of it, her clothes soaked, her hair clinging to her face. Her father's hand trembled around the revolver, his eyes locked on hers. The weapon that once gave him power now looked almost too heavy for him to hold. The Apache warrior didn't move, his breath steady, his gaze calm, waiting to see which way fate would turn. Then something shifted inside the old man. Maybe it was the storm, or maybe it was the sight of his daughter standing in front of the man he had called his enemy. Whatever it was, the fight in his eyes began to fade. His arm lowered, slow and uncertain, until the barrel of the gun pointed toward the ground. For the first time, he looked less like a powerful landowner and more like a father who had lost his way. "You've changed," he said, his voice cracking through the rain. She took a step forward. "No, father. I just stopped being afraid." The words hit him harder than any bullet. He dropped the revolver, letting it fall into the mud. The sound it made was small, almost swallowed by the storm. His shoulders slumped, as if years of pride had suddenly caught up with him. Behind him, his men exchanged glances, unsure whether to stay or leave. The Apache stepped closer, his tone calm but firm. "No one here seeks to dishonor you. Let the past end today. Take your men and go home." The old man stared at him for a long moment, the rain running down his weathered face. Finally, he gave a slow nod. "You've won," he said, The Apache shook his head. There is no winning in this. Only surviving what pride destroys. Her father looked back at his daughter one last time. His eyes, once full of anger, now carried something softer, regret, maybe even love, though too fragile to last. He turned to his men. We're leaving. Gosh, no one argued. The riders slowly turned their horses, retreating down the narrow trail. The sound of hooves faded with the storm, leaving only the river's steady rush behind. The young woman watched until they disappeared into the distance. The weight she had carried for so long finally began to lift. She turned toward the Apache, her voice quiet. It's over. Studied her face for a moment, then nodded. The storm passes, but it changes the land. So it is with people. She managed a small, tired smile. And what happens now? He looked toward the horizon, where the clouds were breaking apart to reveal thin streaks of gold. Now we build something better. The following days were calm, almost too calm after so much fear. The valley smelled of wet earth and new life. The rivers ran higher. The air felt clean. The people of the Apache camp moved quietly, mending what had been broken. The young woman helped where she could, gathering herbs, cleaning the paths, tending to the wounded from the earlier struggles. For the first time in her life, her hands felt useful, not because she was told what to do, but because she chose it. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, she stood by the same river where she had first met the Apache warrior. The water moved fast, full of the storm's memory. He joined her there, silent for a moment before speaking. Your father's land lies just beyond that ridge, he said. Do you ever think of going back? She shook her head slowly. I think of him, yes, but not the land. It was never really home. Maybe one day I'll visit, but only to forgive what was, not to live in it. He nodded, understanding more than words could say. They stood together in the quiet, the sound of the river filling the spaces between them. Later that night, the camp gathered around the fire. The older woman who had first welcomed her placed a small clay bowl in her hands. Inside it was a mix of herbs and ash. For peace, she said. For endings that make room for beginnings. The young woman smiled softly and placed the bowl in the fire. The flames rose higher, burning bright against the night sky. Sparks drifted upward, carried by the wind, disappearing into the stars. In the weeks that followed, she began to rebuild her life, not as the daughter of a wealthy landowner, but as a woman who had found her own strength. She helped the Apache women plant along the riverbank, learn their songs, their stories, their medicine. Each day taught her something new about freedom, the kind that came not from running away, but from standing firm in who she had become. Still, she often thought of her father. She pictured him sitting alone in the big empty house, the walls echoing with memories of what he'd lost. She didn't hate him anymore. Hatred was another kind of chain, and she had finally learned how to live without one. She only hoped that one day he would find peace too. As the seasons changed, so did the valley. The grasses grew tall again, and the scars left by hooves and storms began to fade. The people rebuilt their homes, their laughter returning slowly but surely. And though the world outside still carried danger and uncertainty, this place, this fragile, beautiful valley had become a symbol of what could survive when fear was replaced by courage. One evening, as the sun slipped behind the mountains, the young woman stood beside the Apache, watching the sky turn gold and crimson. I never thought I'd find peace like this, she said softly. He glanced at her with a faint smile. Peace isn't found. It's made one choice at a time. She nodded, feeling those words settle deep inside her. The pain of the past had not vanished, but it no longer defined her. She had faced her father, faced her fear, and chosen her own path. That, she realized, was what true freedom meant. The wind moved through the valley, carrying the scent of sage and rain. The river glimmered with the last light of day. In the distance, an eagle circled high above the cliffs, its wings wide and unbroken. The Apache looked up at it. My people say the eagle flies highest because it dares the storm first. She followed his gaze, watching the bird disappear into the sky. Then maybe that's what we've both done. He nodded. And survived. The night deepened, stars filling the wide expanse overhead. They stood there in silence, two souls from different worlds, bound not by blood or duty, but by the choices that had brought them here, in the stillness. She understood that the story wasn't about winning or losing, or about who was right and who was wrong. It was about learning that peace sometimes comes after breaking, that love can exist without possession, and that healing begins when truth is finally spoken. The valley, once marked by conflict, now held the sound of laughter and the promise of new beginnings. The river flowed on, carrying away the echoes of war, washing the land clean again. And somewhere far beyond the mountains, her father sat beneath the same sky, maybe wondering if his daughter had finally found what she had been searching for all along. She had. And as she watched the stars shimmer across the dark water, she whispered a quiet prayer not for the past, but for whatever came next. The storm had ended, but its memory would always remind her how far she had come, in the heart of that silent valley. Under the vast American sky, she finally understood that freedom was not something given, it was something reclaimed, earned through pain, faith, and the courage to begin again.